incredible weekend. All right, so today I want to talk about something actually pretty relevant to what happened over the weekend. So I remember over the weekend, it was Saturday, turning on TV. It was, I don't know, it was around lunchtime, and watched the French Open and got to see Coco Gauff win the tournament, like 20 years old. Like she's the youngest American to win that trophy since Serena Williams. It was an incredible match and an amazing tournament. Whether you're a tennis fan or not, it was actually a pretty incredible thing. Okay, so why do I share that with you? So this morning I turn on the TV. I'm getting ready for work, coming into the office. Before I do that, so I just went with my morning routine. So watching the news, and it was Good Morning America, and they actually are interviewing Coco Gauff. And in that interview, she says something like, I saw the moment before it happened. And then she said, I visualized the win. And so it was Robin Roberts who was interviewing her. And they talked about that for a few moments, about what that looked like and what that meant for her to see it before it happened, this idea of visualizing the win. And so I thought it'd just be really helpful for us to just pause today and to be able to talk about what does that mean? Like, where does that come from? How does that work? This idea of visualization. Okay, super fascinating. So when we think about Coco Gauff for a moment and her experience over the weekend, let's just start there. That this was actually not just it wasn't just that one match that she played on Saturday. It was actually the 2 weeks that led up to it in the tournament, and the 2 weeks before that, and the 2 months before that, and the 2 years before that, and the like the longer and longer and longer. Right, this was a combination. This wasn't just an occasion. So I think it's helpful again that we recognize, first of all, there's context to this. So when she mentions this idea of she was visualizing the win, I think it's important for us that uh, she wasn't just visualizing the outcome. The win was the outcome, right? Lifting the trophy, right? That was the big deal for her. But she was actually visualizing the process. And we're going to talk about that more specifically in just a little bit. So let's talk about how visualization works. So we need to start from like at I think the neuro kind of science side of this. So visualizing a task, what it does is it's in our brain, like our brain's motor cortex, it fires similarly to when we're actually going through the motions and we're actually performing the task. So it's as if we're we're practicing, right? That's what visualization is. It's a mental practicing, and what it does is it builds neuro pathways to prepare us to do it in real time later. Okay, so a little bit about the neuroscience. I think the emotional part of this is equally important. Visualization, it reduces performance anxiety. Like, I don't know about you, but have you ever had that time when it's time to under pressure to perform in a certain way? And one of my examples is I'm a musician, and there's been times like big events under big pressure where I've had to get up and sort of perform, right? Pick up my guitar or sit down at the piano or hold the microphone, whatever it was, right? There's this immense amount of, man, there might be some excitement, but it comes with some anxiety. So here's what visualization does. Visualization, as I said, reduces anxiety because it gives our mind the rehearsal, right? I talked about this idea that visualization is a type of a practice because it's helping our brain recognize that we've actually been there before we're actually here, right? So just like I was talking about as a musician, right? I would rehearse. I would run through the songs, like physically, again, holding the guitar, sitting down at the piano, singing the lyrics. Right? I might practice or rehearse the verbal transitions between, or the key changes, how I get on and off the stage, or how the set list works, or the counterparts, the other musicians I'm on stage with. Right? All of those things. You might show up at a rehearsal Okay, well, so visualization is that kind of idea. It's a mental rehearsal. And then when we can rehearse, I remember this as a musician. I also remember this as an athlete. I was a soccer player for many years, and I had a privilege of playing for clubs and playing at the collegiate level. And I remember, right, I would show up to training practice time after time after time, and I would those set pieces and those corner kicks and those penalty kicks and whatever the shots were, right, practicing them over and over and over again, so that when it came time to do the real thing on the field in the game, I was more confident. In a sense, I was less anxious. So I want you to think about this in your own way, in your own life, whether that be a sport or be an instrument, or whether that be something that you found yourself under pressure, right? Maybe it's speaking in public. Maybe it is some kind of skill or some kind of task that you have to do at work. Right? It took practice, it took time. And the more you did it, right, the more confident you became and the less anxious you were. So back to this idea of visualization as a mental rehearsal. So again, if we can practice in our minds in advance, it's as if we've already been there when it comes time to do it. Here's another key insight about why and how visualization works. Because visualization is actually focused on the process, not just the outcome. So if we go back and think about this for Coco Gauff, she wasn't just rehearsing in her mind, lifting the trophy at the end of the tournament. No, she was actually practicing in her mind. She was rehearsing. She was rehearsing what it was going to be like to walk in to stadiums full of people, right? The pressure and the stress of cameras and live broadcast and announcers. She was rehearsing in advance. I can only imagine for her, right, of the weather might be like. Is it gonna, what's going to happen if it's rainy? Are they going to close the roof on the stadium? Or are they going to leave it open? What if I'm playing in the afternoon versus in the evening? What about the temperature and the heat that's coming off that clay court? Right. She also had to visualize what it would be like when those matches got hard. Right. When she finds herself trailing or losing, she finds herself down and behind. Right. The work that it required of her. Right. This process based visualization begins in us, and it builds resilience, it builds readiness for the real world. I think that's so important because if it's just outcome based rehearsal, we've missed kind of the whole point. It's actually not going to get us to where we want to go, which is the outcome, which is to at the end of the tournament for Coco Golf or whatever it might be for us. It might be it might be the raving review at work. It might be the high five from a boss. It might be a promotion. It might be, if you're playing a sport, it might be winning the game or winning a tournament or getting a trophy or crossing a finish line or having a PR or whatever it might be in life, right? Rather than just focusing on the outcomes, the real work in visualization is visualizing yourself when it gets hard, when it's challenging and it's difficult. I remember my own experience. For years, I was a marathon runner, and I remember I would train and train and train and train to cross the finish line after 26.2 miles. But I actually remember applying this skill of visualization of when I would start out at the race and what it would be like those first few miles and running through packs of people and actually how congested it would be. And even though my legs were fresh, it was actually kind of mentally frustrating because you had to fight through the crowds to get to the place you wanted to be to kind of find your pace to run the race. I also remember, visually kind of thinking about what's it going to be like when I get to the halfway mark, 13.1 miles. I'm visualizing in my mind where are the aid stations and how am I going to be holding up when I get to those aid stations? If I have some kind of nutrition that I need to be taking, when would I be taking it along the course? I'm visualizing what's the terrain of the course. Are there hills, and where are those hills? And how will I feel when I get to those hills? And what will it be like when I get to the backside of that? I remember for many races thinking about what's often called the wall. for many marathoners, and in fact, many even races acknowledge this on the course. When you get to about mile 20, 21, it's called the wall because it's the time where you're like exhausted and you've come so far, right? And you know that you've done some amazing work to get to the point that you are, but you also know that you're still a ways out. Right? If the wall's at 20 or 21 miles, that means you still got 5 to 6 miles to go. I think for most of us, we like, man, if we were to just get out and go for a run today, we wouldn't even come close to 5 or 6 miles in and of itself. Some of us, not even 5 or 6 blocks. Right? For a marathon runner, this idea of, man, I've come 20, 21 miles and I've hit the wall. My body's exhausted, but I got to push through and I got to keep going. So I remember visualizing what it's like at mile 20 or mile 21 to push through. What's that going to be like? Right? Where's that in the place of getting to the outcome of finishing the crossing the finish line, or in some of those races when I knew that I might be capable of a PR, a personal record, that I would find myself, where am I at that mile marker, 20 or 21? What's my pace? What's my level of energy? What's my need for nutrition? What's my bandwidth and my capacity? What are my emotions like in the midst of that, right? Imagine all those things in a relative way Coco Gauff must have been feeling, and so much more because of the grandiose part of the French Open. Okay, so let's talk about for just a moment this idea of the power of process-focused visualization. I want to go back to Coco Gauff for a moment. So again, when I talked about her not just lifting the trophy, but this part she saw herself, right, like resetting between sets, between points, staying positive after an error, taking deep breaths during the tensious moments. And as I referenced a second ago, that's the magic. That's the secret to visualization. It's helping prepare mentally, and this is important, emotionally in the midst of challenges. There's a ton of like sports psychology around this work that we can apply not just in sports, but we can apply into life. When we focus on the process, we build confidence, adaptability, like mental fortitude, right, to handle the setbacks. So here's what I want you to do for just to participate with me for a moment. I want you to think about what's a process that you can visualize, that you see yourself doing well this week. Okay? I want you to come up with something. What's one process and you want to visualize yourself doing well this week? Reference maybe whether it's speaking at a meeting at work, maybe it's your exercise regimen this week. Maybe it's like being present with your family, like being emotionally, mentally available with a friend. Okay, so let's transition this to how we might use visualization in our lives, like in the real rubber meets the road kind of way. And I just want to walk you through 4 simple steps. The first is, I think it's important that we have to clarify the goal. If we're going to visualize, we have to be able to recognize that we're visualizing in a certain direction to a certain end. So, right, as I mentioned, not just the outcome, but we want to define the key process that will get us there, right? That we're going to need along the way. So let me give you an example. So instead of just picturing crossing the finish line, right, visualize each training, your posture, your breathing, like I said, the temperature, the terrain. Again, if that's a physical workout, like I was referencing earlier for me as a runner. Okay, so you're going to clarify the goal and the steps along the way, right? The process that moves us through. Step number 2, I want you to engage in your senses, like all 5 of your senses. I imagine this happened for Coco Gauff. I've shared some of my examples. I'm sure you might have examples too. Is think about it. What does it look like? What does it feel like? What does it sound like? Even smell, taste, whatever that might be. So here's another kind of sports example. So imagine like this, the sweat, right? The pounding of your feet, right? The cheers of the crowd. If you're going to apply this into, when you walk into the boardroom at a big meeting coming up, or you're taking the stage in a way that you're speaking. In fact, one of the tips that I have when I go do public speaking, I often will ask to see the stage before the event starts. Well, why do I do that? Because I want to visualize. I want to be able to walk into the room. I kind of want to be able to take it in. I want to imagine what it's going to be like, right, when people fill that room. When possible, I actually love to be in that room when the lights are on. Oftentimes, I have to go in and do a mic check, so it kind of works out anyways. But then I stand on that stage, right, and I'm actually rehearsing. I might actually be rehearsing whether I'm going through slides or I'm looking through my notes. I'm just looking out over the empty chairs, right? There's something that's happening inside of me. I'm visualizing what it's going to be like when I speak or when I give that presentation in real time. So this idea of engaging your senses, what does it look like, smell like? What does it feel like? Right? Think about that in your application. All right, so here's step 3, which is visualize handling challenges. Like, if we're just going to be real about this, right? Not everything goes perfectly all the time. And I think it's unhelpful for us, again, if we're just outcome visualizing, we're not recognizing that real challenges happen in real time, in real life. So let's just go ahead and visualize handling challenges. So picture yourself staying focused in the midst of like what kind of might feel a little chaotic, right? When nervousness kicks in, or a mistake happens, or from the example I talked about in public speaking, something fails in the technology, right? Like the mic stops working, or the slides don't come up at the right time, or I've my if I'm using an iPad for my notes, it's gone blank, right? Like thinking in advance, right, for what those visualizing the hard challenges might be. So Coco Gauff had to do that right before, while she was visualizing the challenges in the tournament and in the final match, right, as a part of lifting that trophy at the end. All right, and here's the last one. Repeat regularly. So just like Coco, right, just like the examples that I shared, visualization is a practice. So if it's a practice, we want to make it a habit, right? We want to rehearse this over and over and over. So here's something we can do. And I would encourage you, like, just take 5 minutes a day. 5 minutes a day is enough to start rewriting, when I talked about earlier, like your brain for success. When I talked about the neurology of this, practice 5 minutes a day. You can do that. I can do that. In fact, as I'm hearing myself, what a helpful reminder to me, right? That I can set aside 5 minutes a day, and you can too, to rewrite your brain towards success. It's important in the midst of this that no matter how big, or this part, how small that success might look like, right? So maybe you have a goal for this week to drink more water. Visualize yourself drinking water. This mental rehearsal. But you know what you can also do in the midst of that is a part of you're actually kind of doing some mental preparation, some practice in and of itself, because you're thinking about, okay, so where is that water fountain at the office? Is there water in the fridge at the gym, or is there a place for me to get it after my workout? Do I have a favorite cup that maybe I imagine myself using repeatedly in the same day? Or maybe it's one of those big, massive ones that tells you how much water you are drinking, and you're visualizing it going down throughout the day. And you're actually kind of setting measurements and metrics as a part of your process. Now, That might be real for you, and for others, it might be kind of silly, but that's practical, right? Visualizing myself drinking more water today or this week, right? Maybe it's about a exercise regimen. Maybe it is about a presentation at work. Maybe it is about a conversation or an experience with a friend or a family member. All right. So those steps again: clarify the goal, um, engage in your senses, visualize handling the challenges, and repeat regularly. All right. So as we wrap up, visualization isn't about dreaming the win. It's about training your mind, right? Like rehearsing in your mind to handle the journey, right? Not just the destination. So, like, I'm training my mind for success. Well, you can do the same, right? You want to see it, you want to feel it, and then ultimately you want to live it. So, as we wrap up, I would encourage you, when we talked about earlier, this like go back to that prompt that I mentioned. What is one area or what is one process that you would like to visualize yourself doing well this week? Okay, answer that question. And then would love if you would actually write that down, or actually it'd be really helpful if you would share that with, have somebody else on the other side who's there to support you and encourage you, and as needed, help you stay accountable to this work. All right. So Wednesday, join us back here. Dr. Mike's going to be with us for Wellness Wednesday. I'll be back for Faithful Friday. Have an amazing week, everyone.